free to in the Highlands of Louisville, Kentucky, and worldwide on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, YouTube, Facebook at Shooting from the Lip, Google Play, and now iHeartRadio. This is Shooting from the Lip Live. I'm Erik McEwen with Mr. Kevin Hale, and we have two very special guests this week. We have, in the spirit of National Bourbon Day, which is June 14th, we have Mr. Stephen Fante from Limestone Distilleries and Miss Robin Edwards, the Kentucky State Manager for Lux Road Distillery. How are y'all doing?
We're doing great.
Fantastic.
Did I get that right? Was I close?
Almost.
Okay, sorry. It's a lot. There's a lot in my mouth there I had to get out there. So, National Bourbon Day. We live in Kentucky, so I would just think that every day is National Bourbon Day.
In my opinion, it is.
Right.
I visited frequently.
That's good. So, we obviously have some experts in the spirit area, and going over to Stephen right now. Tell me a little bit about Limestone and a little history about Limestone Distillery.
Limestone Branch Distillery is down in Lebanon, Kentucky. It has the last beam on a still. That is a very important feature.
And can you explain that to me?
Yeah, there's like 7 major distilleries in Kentucky for years, and those 7 distilleries, 6 of them had beams on the still at one point or another.
A beam on a still.
Yeah. You got Jim Beam, you've got Minor Case Beam. The easiest way to understand this is Minor Case is his first cousin.
Okay.
Minor Case was Stephen Paul's great-grandfather. Prior to Prohibition, he was making Old Trump whiskey. And Jim Beam was making Old Tub whiskey. So when you get past Prohibition, Minor Case passes away, and that ends the distillery line of the family. There's very few Beams that ever owned distilleries, and Minor Case was one of them. Well, when the opportunity to buy or to get into craft distillery licenses appeared, Steve Beam applied. He was one of the very first ones to apply.
Oh, wow.
He is a 7th generation Beam distiller, and he's a co-owner of Limestone Branch Distillery. So he's one of those very few Beams in history to have owned and be part of his own distillery. And he's doing craft bourbons that are incredible.
So we can hashtag beam on a still.
I'd say that might work.
I like it.
I think it might really make Beam pretty happy.
Steve would like that, I'm sure.
So in Kentucky, everybody claims, or a lot of people claim to be bourbon aficionados. Everybody you run into thinks that they're just, the bourbon people. So Stephen and Robin, I would like to clear up some probably myths or misunderstandings, or we'll just shorten it, call it myth understanding about bourbon. It's you hear out there that it can only be called bourbon if it's made in Bourbon County or expansively into Kentucky. Is that true?
No, that is completely false.
Okay.
Bourbon is America's native spirit. It's
America's native spirit?
It is. It is our beverage. Bourbon can be made in all 50 states. 98% of all the bourbon made in America is made in Kentucky. We're worried about the rest.
Now, other people, I've also heard, is it because of the limestone that's in the ground?
Water's a huge attribute to making good bourbon. And in Kentucky, we have a limestone shelf that's incredible. On our distillery property, the boy that sold Beam the property told him that lake back in the back had concrete bottom in it.
Wow.
He went out there, pulled some of it up. It's solid limestone.
Wow.
We've got a piece of that, a chunk of that in our hallway during our tours.
Nice. So another misunderstanding is that bourbon needs to be aged for 2 years?
Bourbon is bourbon the day it hits the charred American oak barrel.
All right.
As long as it's got 51% corn in it and it follows the guidelines of the mash bill, as soon as it hits the barrel, it's bourbon. Nobody sells that. It doesn't have any color. The most of the color happens in the first 6 to 8 weeks.
So bourbon can only be aged using charred new American white oak barrels?
That is correct.
Okay. So is that what makes whiskey a bourbon?
Whiskey becomes a bourbon when it follows all guidelines. It has to be 51% corn. It has to be aged for at least 1 year in the barrel to be called Kentucky bourbon. That is in the state of Kentucky only. You could be called bourbon from day one. It's 2 years in the barrel to be called Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. At 4 years in the barrel, you can drop your age statement. At 7 years in the barrel, you want to put it back on because you're proud of it again.
I like it. Now, so was bourbon called bourbon because of Bourbon County, Kentucky?
That's some of the lore. I love the lore. There's so many different stories, but one of the best stories is that down in New Orleans, they kept receiving shipments of this whiskey that had Bourbon County written on it, and it was better. It was smoother. It had aged for longer because it had to come all the way through those tributaries of waterways, cavitated throughout all that, so it was going in and out of the oak a little bit more frequently. And as it got down to New Orleans, people started seeing this label, Bourbon County, on it and saying, I want that bourbon whiskey.
So that's why.
That's the
That's
lore.
why it's called bourbon. I mean, it's not fact that's folklore, but.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
But I'll go with it.
I like it. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Limestone. I've sampled it. Great bourbon. Great bourbon. What sets you guys apart from, the big, huge, worldwide, the Jim Beam? Like, what makes you guys so wonderful? What makes it taste so good when I take a sip?
We make 1 barrel a day.
Really?
Most of these distilleries sweep up off the floor more than we produce. We're doing it off of pot stills the old-fashioned way. We've got a 150-gallon alembic still, one of the oldest still designs known to mankind.
Alembic?
Uh-huh. It's a hand-hammered solid copper and imported from Spain. That's our finishing still. We get 25 gallons of usable product off a 150-gallon distillation. That's all that makes it to the bourbon barrel. That takes 3 distillations to get to that point. We do 6 distillations a day to get to 1 barrel of bourbon. You think that's probably pretty good?
I think that's... Well, there's also some talk. Where does the rest of the bourbon go? What do they call that?
Well, you've got the spent grains from the mash. That goes to a farmer there in Lebanon.
Right.
Traditionally, Frog comes and gets it.
That's his name.
Well, at least it was. The last time I checked, I don't watch our mash tanks and where they go at the end of the stages, but that's who was picking it up for quite some time. And then they feed it to their feeder calves and different, farm uses for that product.
Okay.
So we use some of the heads and some of the tails. You know what sour mash is all about.
Right.
You take a little bit of your previous mash that you've distilled through. It has a high acidity content. You start your next distillation out with that because you want a high acidity content. Why give all that to the farmer? He gets enough already. Make a sour mash out of it. Get yourself some consistency in your product.
Right.
Next year's bourbon will taste identical to last year's.
Now, somebody talks about the angel share.
Mm-hmm, that's me.
Stephen, you're no angel.
Thank you.
I've been wondering for so long where that went, and now you're sitting right here in front of me.
As barrel house manager, I have to do tastings of all those samplings of all those. That's part of the angel share. So I
Okay.
consider myself the angel. The rest of it is done through evaporation from high temperatures in the barrel house.
Right.
So there's a much better name than high temperature.
So your job doesn't suck.
No,
No,
I have to pay them to come into work.
Right. Okay. I'm glad. It sounds like they have a pretty good model of how to run a business here when employees are paying them. And I'm on board, and I would probably do the same. So, Limestone, let's talk about some of the in Kentucky and probably in other places. But I know in Kentucky, we're talking about everybody's a bourbon expert. A lot of people are going after these sought-after rare labels. What are some that you guys have at your distillery?
That limited edition 2017 is the Sniggle shit.
Okay, will you explain that a little bit for me?
Well, it's 8,500 or so bottles. That's all that exists. And it took
really?
a double gold in San Francisco.
Really?
So,
That's the Yellowstone.
yeah, Yellowstone Limited Edition 2017. It's a 12, 7, and 4-year Kentucky Straight bourbon. It's been finished off in toasted wood wine casks. What kind of wine do you think was in it?
I don't know.
Never had wine in it. Had bourbon in it last year. Last year's limited edition, 2016, was finished off in a toasted wood wine cask, giving it a toasted wood finish like no other bourbon I'd ever drank. It was fantastic, 101 proof. This year's limited edition, he took that cask after the bourbon had been dumped out of it directly to the cooperage to have a Gator 1 char fired over top of that previous bourbon. This year's bourbon is bourbon on bourbon.
Bourbon on bourbon.
It is. It's got fatter legs than Rosie O'Donnell and a longer hang time than Michael Jordan.
I love this guy.
I need to add
I mean,
a sound bite after.
can we record you for sound clips for our show? Because this is incredible, Stephen. We appreciate you.
Have to get Rosie's voice, right after he said something.
He has trademarked the snizzle shits word, though, so
gonna say-
easy.
Okay, so
The FCC.
She's getting
won't frown on
skinnier.
that
I'm
rule.
going to have to find a new candidate.
the snizzle shit. All right. Okay. Well, I mean, I've learned a lot so far. But that 2017, that's the Yellowstone.
It is.
The difference between Limestone, is Yellowstone a product of Limestone Branch?
That's totally correct. Limestone's the parent. Yellowstone is one of the children. We have Yellowstone Kentucky Straight Bourbon. We've got minor case sherry cask finished rye. We've got an entire barrel house of Limestone Branch bourbons that I'm in charge of. They're experimental barrels, and those are very exciting. We're tasting those with the general public that come through our distillery tour. So if they get an opportunity to come down to our distillery for a free tour and tasting, they're going to taste unique and different things they've never thought of in bourbon in their life.
A free tour and tasting.
That's an odd concept. We're still there. Eventually it's going to change. We're going to start charging for this tour, but until then, it's free. So come get it while it is.
That sounds great to me. Well, we're going to do that, Kevin. We need to take the show down there.
Should.
Without the microphones. We don't need microphones for, because, you know what happens when bourbon's around.
Yeah, I mean, but you want the video to capture.
Right, and we'll do that.
Yeah.
Another misconception that I've heard is that bourbon is bourbon before it becomes Tennessee whiskey. Is that true?
No.
Okay. There are people who make Tennessee whiskey that say it's bourbon before Tennessee whiskey.
I beg to differ.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think it was because how it's finished with I don't remember. They say that there's an extra step.
There's that C
Anytime
word.
you filtrate the product, anytime you take it through charcoal, anytime you take
Yep.
and change the color of it, that's one of those things you can't do with bourbon. It is all whiskey once it's gone through charcoal.
So
All bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon.
okay, so Chris Stapleton had it wrong, or George Jones, who actually wrote the song. Yeah, it should be smoother than bourbon, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Can you?
Well,
can
yeah,
you-
I'll just call Chris and tell him to just change the lyrics. I'm sure George Jones won't mind.
You got connected.
So there's a lot going on with Limestone. You know, I see on the Facebook page. Gosh, this facility looks beautiful.
It is
down
gorgeous.
there. Lots of different flavors involved. What else do you have right there? I see something about a jalapeno.
Yeah, we did some moonshines there in the beginning to get this
Some
thing
moonshine.
up and running. Sure did.
Yeah.
T.J. Pottinger Sugar Shine.
T.J. Pottinger Sugar Shine.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like that sounds like some folklore right there. Where did that name come from?
That is an old family name. The Pottingers had a distillery. I believe Minor Case got it sometime later. The exact story on that, I'm not sure of the whole timeline of it. You have to have a beam in the house to be able to get all that intricacy done. We're going to put a lot of it up on the wall, but Pottingers was one of the oldest distillers and names in the business.
Okay.
And so he named it T.J. Pottinger Sugar Shine.
Sugar Shine.
Look at all these
That's
products.
when we opened it up.
Now, what do you got there, Kevin?
Look, Yellowstone Bourbon,
Right.
Precinct 6. That sounds like something
The-
straight out of Eddyville or something. There's a Revenge.
Close.
Apple cinnamon sugar, blackberry sugar, cherry sugar. These are moonshine. Strawberry sugar. You mentioned the jalapeno. Vanilla moon pie.
Oh, yeah.
Like a little
That
dip.
sounds great.
What's that?
Sounds like Cracker Barrel
Yeah.
right there. Yeah.
Chocolate moon pie, banana moon pie.
So let's talk about the Revenge, because that's usually what Yellowstone does to me the next day. What can you explain where the name came from? Why it's called Revenge?
Well, Steve's great-grandfather was Minor Case Beam, Jim Beam's first cousin. And when he made his sugar shine, he barrel-aged some of it. Now, that would have been an old Prohibition trick. It would have been days of Al Capone in Chicago when you would have taken some moonshine and put it into a used bourbon barrel, let the angel hair sweat out into it, and give it some flavor of whiskey. And if it had any kind of flavor of whiskey with a finish of bourbon, you could sell it for top dollar. And they'd want more. So it didn't matter where you visited, they'd always want your product. So a lot of moonshiners were always on the lookout for used bourbon barrels. Minor Case Beam passed away 115 days after Prohibition was abolished, never to get that distillery back open again, which ended the owner and distiller line. Steve named it Revenge because it's the great-grandchildren's revenge on Prohibition. They're back in the bottle and on the shelf. Minor Case Beam's Revenge.
There seems like a lot of folklore involved with the Limestone Branch Distillery. How long has it been around?
May of 2011 is when the shovel hit the ground. By February 2012, he took his first gold medal for his corn whiskey.
Wow, that didn't take long at all.
No, I didn't even
Wasted
dust
no
the still
time.
off. He went straight to distillation.
So I'm loving this. I mean, and I'm a Limestone fan. I love Yellowstone. It's really good. Robin, being the Kentucky state manager for Lux Road Distilleries, what all do you have under the Bourbon Distillery and the other spirits you have under the Lux Road name?
So Lux Row is our newest adventure. We just opened up our distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky in April, our grand opening. We've been distilling since mid-January, and that is the permanent home now for Rebel Yell, Ezra Brooks, David Nicholson, and Blood Oath bourbons.
Blood Oath bourbon, and I've had that before. How rare is that right now, Blood Oath?
It's an allocated item. It's pretty rare. We come out once a year, and we just released Pact 4.
Wow.
It's our 4th year.
Okay, so Rebel Yell, and obviously I'm a big fan. I've heard of that somewhere. Usually, if you see something I'm wearing that says Rebel Yell on it, it's a really good
It's a
bourbon.
really good looking hat you have
Oh,
on.
well, thank you. And the flavors among Rebel Yell and the labels I've seen, you have the root beer,
We have the root beer.
the ginger.
We do.
I think there's a small batch rye.
Yep.
And then is the Rebel single barrel still around?
The Rebel 10-year single barrel was released in April, and it comes in and goes out as quickly
As soon as they run out of juice, it's gone.
It's gone. yeah.
Okay. And then, so that, as far as bourbon goes, Ezra Brooks, sounds like an old name. How long has that been around?
Ezra Brooks been around a long time. We make 2 labels for Ezra. We have the 90 proof black label, and we have the 2-year-old straight rye whiskey.
Okay, that rye's pretty spicy, isn't it?
It's a great spicy rye,
Right.
and it's 90 proof.
Oh wow.
Yeah, great cocktails.
Oh, okay. Well, great. So we have that. And then what else under Lux Road? What else are y'all making?
We make David Nicholson
Which is
bourbon.
bourbon.
We have 2. We have the 1843, and we have the Reserve, which was the bourbon of the year last year in 2017 at the San Francisco Spirits competition.
Wow. David Nicholson.
It
Have you
beat
heard
out.
it? Well, we do now.
It beat out a brand that most people around here might know as Old Forester Birthday
Oh, wow.
by Fred Minnick.
Throw that in their face.
Yeah.
Yes, I love to do it in their backyard. It's my backyard now too.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think y'all have a tequila too, don't you?
We do. with like our partnership with Limestone Branch, we own 50% of that. We also own 50% of our tequila distilleries down in Guadalajara, which was where we make Juarez tequila, we make Exotico tequila, and El Mayor tequila.
Have you had Exotico tequila?
Have not.
It's incredible.
It's 100% blue agave.
They have the Blanco, the Reposado. Is those the only two labels you have under
On
Exotico?
Exotico, yes.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm excited about National Bourbon Day Thursday. I think you and I need to celebrate. I think we're going to celebrate with some Yellowstone. Where can we find these in Louisville? And to the people who are listening outside of Kentucky right now, are these labels available in?
Well, you bring up you're going where you're going with the next question. Actually, is where I'm a novice to. Help me understand, if you don't mind, how your product makes it to, the store or a bar.
Okay. So Kentucky and the majority of the United States outside of the control states, we'll leave those alone. We're not a control state, we're an open state.
Okay.
It's a 3-tiered system. I work for the supplier / manufacturer. So we make it, we bottle it, we box it, we ship it to the distributor. Here in Kentucky, it's Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits here in Louisville.
Okay.
We ship it to them. They have a team of sales reps for bars and restaurants and a team for what we call off-premise, which is all your liquor stores. And they go out and sell it, and then at the retail or bar level is where the consumer can reach it. So that's the 3 tiers that we do.
Gotcha.
So everything under, or Stephen, back to you. We've talked about some names, and before we get into where you brought up Still, and there are people, believe it or not, Kevin, that listen to this outside of Louisville and Kentucky. What's a cooperage?
The cooperage is the barrel manufacturing plant.
These are words that we don't say every day, or we don't.
Yeah.
Totally understand.
And the manufacturing plant for
The actual barrels that the bourbon goes into, the first one that I was ever in was at Brown Forman's Cooperage. They own their own coopers, and they own their own forest. So they do it from the very beginning all the way through the whole stage. Independent Stave is the only cooperage that gives free tours, or actually it's not free anymore, but tours to the public. So you can go to Independent Stave and get a tour of the barrel manufacturing plant right up the street from Limestone Branch Distillery. It's less than a mile away. And you get a chance to see the actual making of the barrels, how they assemble them, how they pull all the wood together, how the staves fit together, how they put them together, drop the rings on them. You get to see how they break the barrels apart, what a Gator 1, Gator 2, Gator 3, Gator 4 char means, and what that means to different distilleries, because they'll tell you kind of, this distillery does Gator 3s and this distillery does Gator 4 chars, and it gives a very distinct flavor profile when you do that. So a majority of your flavor, a lot of your flavor comes from the barrel itself, and so that's a key component to making great bourbon. If you know the cooperage end of it, you're much higher in the bourbon drinking end of it as far as knowledge.
So, and I think, the certified bourbon experts are called bourbon stewards. Is that right?
I'm an executive bourbon steward for Limestone Branch Distillery.
Wow.
It's a long title.
I like it. It looks like that you guys are a big sponsor of the Marion County Music Fest. I saw that there's a post that came up last week about that. Where is that? Do you know anything about it? That just now popped up.
I know that we sponsored it and that we had cocktails being made at it, and our craft cocktail specialist, Justin, was real excited about going down to serve some of our different cocktail mixes. The Bourbon Bacon Bloody Mary is the #1 selling drink out of Miners Lounge. If you've never had bourbon and a Bloody Mary before, you're missing life. Vodka is a neutral grain spirit that adds no flavor to Bloody Marys. You put bourbon in it, it adds a whole new dimension to it. And then you add hickory smoked bacon salt around the rim, and you've got yourself something special.
Hickory smoked bacon salt.
Schreiber's in town there takes care of us on our own private hickory smoked bacon salt. They're a spice company that makes our own spices for that specific
They've hijacked all the food groups.
I'm wiping my mouth here. Anybody in the Lip Nation, anybody knows who listens
Eric,
to the
stop
show,
drooling.
we love bourbon, bourbon then bacon. So if we're mixing two of the best things
Bourbon,
on
bacon, tomatoes. It's all your food groups.
Yeah. So who needs vodka? I don't like Russian crap. Nobody wants that. We'll put some bourbon and some Bloody Marys. Put some bacon in that.
That's right.
That sounds delicious. That's what we're going to do. How about Thursday, Kevin? What are you doing?
Whatever you're doing.
We're going to get some bacon, and we're going to
Try it. We got to film it. We got to do it for them.
Yeah, we're going to get some Yellowstone bourbon.
Okay, let's do it.
And this is what we're going to do. National Bourbon Day is June 14th. We can find all of these great bourbons on shelves and in bars in Louisville. Is that right?
That is correct.
Totally.
And if you don't find it, ask for it. They'll get it.
Nice. All right. Well,
Can I ask another question as far as when you're delivering or you have your product at a bar, restaurant bar, is there, what's the right way to put it? In business terms, no compete clause. Is there restrictions that if you put your product in a location that it's your product and that type of bourbon and no one, or how do y'all, is that?
By law, once the place buys it, it's their product. They can do whatever they want with it.
Gotcha. All right.
But we don't always follow the law.
Bourbon
Can you edit
Wars.
that out?
Yes, we can. Well, it sounds great. And Steve, I really appreciate the knowledge that you shared with us. And we'd love to have you back on the show. Keep talking about bourbon.
Love it.
Robin, love everything that you do, all the spirits that you represent here in Kentucky. They're all some of my favorites. And if y'all know me, I love some Rebel Yell.
You do?
I do.
That's
I-
right.
Look at it. Look
Yeah.
into your hat. Rebel, yeah.
I was going to make a Billy Idol joke, but that'd be bad
sing
taste.
it.
So, no.
It's okay. You can.
No, we have to pay for it.
What do you do in the midnight hour?
Cry for more. Because